be me, 25, and I feel like I'm one of the few people who actually gets it. I'm a feminist, and not just in a performative, trendy way. I actually see the systems of power, the subtle ways the patriarchy affects everything. It's exhausting, honestly, living in a world that wasn't built for you. Most of my energy goes into navigating the constant barrage of toxic masculinity. It's in the workplace, it's on the street, it's especially in the dating scene. My friends don't always understand the depth of it, but I see it clearly. Through all of this, for the longest time, I had one safe harbor. My best friend, Demir. He's known me since we were teenagers. He was, and I use the past tense for reasons that will become clear, the exception to the rule. He was the guy you could call at 2 a.m., the one who would listen, the one who didn't make everything about himself. He was proof that men could be good, they just usually chose not to be. Our friendship was perfect. It was this balanced thing where I could be my true, unfiltered self. I could vent about my frustrations with men, and he would just nod and agree. He understood. He got it. Or so I thought. The whole thing started to unravel a few months ago. I'd made a post online, something fairly standard, about the weaponization of incompetence by men in domestic settings. Just pointing out how men pretend not to know how to do basic chores to force women into doing all the labor. The backlash was instantaneous and completely unhinged. My inbox was flooded with angry men. My comments section was a wasteland of fragility. It was one of those moments that just drains you, makes you feel hopeless about the state of things. I felt this heavy weight on my chest, this mix of anger and sadness. I did what I always did. I called Demir. He picked up right away, his voice calm and steady. I just let it all out, a torrent of frustration. I told him about the comments, how they were twisting my words, how they were proving my point with their very reactions. I was probably rambling, maybe even crying a little bit from sheer exhaustion. He just listened. He didn't interrupt. When I finally ran out of steam, he just said all the right things. He told me I was brave for speaking out, that I was right, that those guys were just insecure and couldn't handle a strong woman pointing out the truth. He validated every single thing I was feeling. It was like a soothing balm on a burn. I remember ending the call feeling so much lighter, so grateful. I told him he was literally the best, a shining example of a male ally. He just made a quiet sound, and we hung up. I felt powerful again, like I could take on the world. That was our dynamic. He was my emotional support system. I provided him with, I don't know, a woman's perspective, I guess. I was helping him be better. It seemed like a fair exchange of emotional labor. Around this same time, I was trying to make something happen with a guy from my gym. He was the complete opposite of Demir in almost every way. He was very physically imposing, confident to the point of arrogance, and didn't talk much. He was a challenge. I know what it sounds like, but it wasn't a contradiction of my beliefs. I felt that if I could be with a guy like that, a traditionally alpha male, and get him to respect me and my feminism, it would be a victory. It would prove that even the most stereotypically masculine men could be enlightened. It was a project, in a way, so I was putting a lot of effort into getting his attention. I'd make sure to work out near him, ask for a spot I didn't really need. Eventually, he asked for my number. It was a huge success. We made plans to go out that weekend. I was ecstatic, and of course, the first person I wanted to tell was Demir. But I also needed his help. I was a mess. I had no idea what to wear. I called him up and basically ordered him to come over for an emergency fashion consultation. He showed up about an hour later with my favorite coffee, just like I knew he would. He was so reliable. It was one of the best things about him. I spent the next hour pulling out half my wardrobe, holding dresses up against myself. I kept asking for his opinion. This one? Too desperate? This one? Does it say I'm a powerful woman who is comfortable with her sensuality? Or does it just say easy? He was trying his best, but he seemed off. He was quieter than usual. He'd just say things like, "That one looks nice," without any real enthusiasm. It was a little annoying, to be honest. I needed his full attention for this. I finally settled on this black dress that was maybe a little more revealing than I'd normally wear. I asked him one last time if it was okay. He just looked at me for a second and said it looked great on me. There was this weird tone in his voice I couldn't place. Sadness, maybe? I brushed it off. He was probably just tired from work. Then came the big ask. The place the gym guy picked was on the other side of town, a real pain to get to. I really didn't want to take a bus in that dress or pay for a rideshare, so I asked Demir if he could just give me a lift. He hesitated for a moment. It was the first time I could remember him ever hesitating to do something for me. He said he had plans to work on some personal project that night. I kind of laughed it off, told him he could do his project anytime. This was a real emergency. I put on my best pleading voice, told him I'd owe him one. After a few seconds of silence, he agreed. Of course he did. The car ride was awkward. I was buzzing with excitement and nerves, and I just talked and talked about the gym guy. I talked about how hot he was, how it was so refreshing to be with a guy who was so secure in his masculinity. I might have said something about how I was tired of all the weak, passive men out there. I wasn't talking about Demir, obviously. He was different, he was my friend, but I noticed him gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. He didn't say a word the whole way, just stared straight ahead at the road. I was so wrapped up in my own world, I barely noticed. He dropped me off a block away from the restaurant, just as I asked. I gave him a quick, "Thanks, you're the best," and hopped out of the car before he could even respond. The date itself was a disappointment. The gym guy was boring. He could only talk about protein intake and his workout splits. He barely asked me a single question about myself. When I tried to bring up a topic with some substance, his eyes just glazed over. He wasn't secure, he was just simple. He wasn't enlightened, he was just empty. He paid the bill, walked me to the corner, gave me a half-hearted hug, and that was it. No text the next day. Nothing. He just ghosted me. I was furious. Not hurt, but angry. Angry at the waste of my time, angry at the sheer arrogance of it all. It was another perfect example of toxic male behavior. Use a woman for an ego boost, and then discard her. I spent the next day fuming. By evening, I was back to feeling that familiar mix of frustration and exhaustion with the world. I needed my release valve. I needed to talk to Demir. I needed him to tell me I was right, that the gym guy was human garbage, and that I was better off without him. I called him. It went straight to voicemail. That was strange. He never ignored my calls. I texted him, "Emergency, need to talk." An hour went by, no reply. Now I was starting to get worried and a little irritated. Maybe he was still upset about the car ride. It was so petty if he was. I gave him some space. A few days passed. Still nothing. My messages weren't even showing as delivered. Did he block me? No, he wouldn't. That was unthinkable. My anxiety started to grow. What if something had happened to him? But my annoyance was growing faster. How could he just disappear when I needed him? After all the years of friendship, I felt betrayed. I decided to give it one more try. I called him from a friend's phone. It rang. He picked up. The relief was so overwhelming, I didn't even let him speak. I just started talking, telling him how worried I was, how I'd been trying to reach him, how I had a horrible date and needed to tell him all about it. There was just silence on the other end of the line. When I finally paused for breath, his voice was flat, cold. He just said, "Sophia, what do you want?" I was taken aback. It was such a hostile question. I told him I wanted to talk to my best friend. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said we needed to meet. He told me to come to the park near his apartment. I was confused, but agreed. I figured he wanted to apologize in person for ignoring me. When I got there, he was already sitting on a bench. He looked different, thinner, maybe, but his posture was straighter. He didn't stand up when I approached. I sat down next to him, ready to launch into my story about the gym guy, but the look on his face stopped me. It was a look I'd never seen before. There was no warmth, no sympathy. It was just empty. I asked him what was wrong, why he'd been ignoring me. He looked at me, really looked at me, and said he couldn't do it anymore. I had no idea what he was talking about. Do what anymore? I asked. This, he said, gesturing vaguely between the two of us. Our friendship. I was completely blindsided. I thought he was joking. He said he wasn't. He told me that for years he'd had feelings for me. My heart just sank. Oh no, it was that. The thing I always dreaded. The classic nice guy trope, where he's only friends with you because he wants something more. I felt a wave of disappointment. I had thought he was better than that. He went on, his voice still flat and emotionless. He said that being my friend, being my constant support while I chased after other guys, was destroying him. He mentioned the car ride. He said driving me to my date with the gym guy, listening to me talk about him, was the most humiliating experience of his life. I tried to interrupt, to tell him he was misunderstanding everything, that he wasn't like those other guys, but he just kept talking. He said he was done. Done being my emotional dumpster. Done waiting around for me to notice him. Done putting his own life on hold for me. I was in shock. I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how to salvage this. He was my best friend. I couldn't lose him. I needed him. So I fell back on the tried and true method, the thing you say to let a guy down easy without destroying the friendship. I put my hand on his arm, looked at him with as much sincerity as I could muster, and deployed the line. "Oh, Demir," I said, my voice soft. "I had no idea. I am so sorry. But I could never see you that way. You're like a brother to me." I waited for the usual reaction, the sad nod, the quiet acceptance. But it didn't come. He didn't look sad. He didn't look hurt. He just looked at me. And for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It wasn't sadness. It was pity. He was pitying me. He slowly pulled his arm away from my hand. He stood up. He looked down at me on the bench and said, "I know. That's the problem." And then he just turned around and walked away. I just sat there, completely stunned. I watched him walk until he turned a corner and disappeared. He didn't look back, not even once. I was expecting to feel guilty, or maybe even sad for him, but all I felt was a rising tide of indignation and inconvenience. How could he do this? How could he throw away years of friendship just because he couldn't handle his feelings? It was so selfish, so typically male. I was the victim here. I was the one who was losing a friend because he couldn't control his emotions. I sat on that bench for a long time, convinced he'd made a huge mistake. He'd cool off. He'd realize he was being dramatic. He would come back. He always came back. I went home feeling annoyed, but not truly worried. I figured I'd give him a week to get over himself, and then he'd send an apology text. Our friendship was too important for him to just throw away. I was sure of it. A week passed. Nothing. 2 weeks. Still silence. I started to feel the first real prickle of panic. My life felt unbalanced without him. Little things kept happening that I'd normally tell him about. A condescending comment from my boss, a terrible movie I watched, a funny thing I saw on the street. My thumb would automatically go to his contact in my phone before I remembered. The silence he left behind was deafening. I realized how much I had relied on him, not just for the big emotional crises, but for the small, everyday moments. He was the narrator of my life, the person who listened to my stories and affirmed them. Without him, my experiences felt incomplete, unvalidated. The panic began to morph into real anger. This was a power play. That's all it was. He was trying to punish me for rejecting him. It was a form of emotional manipulation, a classic tactic of toxic masculinity. He was trying to make me feel his absence, so I'd come crawling back and give him what he wanted. Well, it wasn't going to work. I was a strong, independent woman. I didn't need a man to validate my existence. I certainly didn't need him. So I decided to double down. I would go out, have fun, and live my best life. I'd post pictures online, make sure he could see how happy I was without him. It would show him that his little tantrum had no effect on me. I went out with some friends that weekend. We went to a bar, and I spent the whole night trying to force myself to have a good time. I talked to a few guys. They were all the same. One tried to explain my own political beliefs to me. Another one couldn't stop talking about his crypto investments. A third one kept trying to touch the small of my back. Each interaction just left me feeling more and more drained. None of them listened. Not really. They were just waiting for their turn to talk, to impress me, to get something from me. I came home that night feeling more alone than ever. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and the truth hit me like a physical blow. I missed him. I didn't miss having a man's attention. I missed my friend. I missed his easy laugh, his stupid jokes, the way he knew exactly what to say. The anger inside me deflated, replaced by a hollow ache. This wasn't a game. It wasn't a tactic. It was real. He was gone. And I had driven him away. The realization was terrifying. The world felt colder, harsher, without my safety net. For the first time, I felt truly, completely alone with my thoughts. And they weren't very kind. My confident feminist worldview suddenly felt like a flimsy shield against a storm I had created myself. I had been so sure I understood the dynamics between men and women, but I had completely misread the most important one in my own life. I had taken his kindness for weakness. I had mistaken his loyalty for obligation. I had used his love for me as a free, inexhaustible resource. And now the resource was gone. The well had run dry. The next month was a blur of anxiety and denial. I kept checking my phone, hoping for a message that never came. I even tried walking by his apartment building a few times, hoping to run into him accidentally. I never saw him. My friends noticed the change in me. I was quiet, withdrawn. When they asked what was wrong, I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. How could I explain that my entire emotional stability had been dependent on one man? A man I had systematically taken for granted until he broke. It went against everything I claimed to believe in. I was supposed to be the strong one, the one who didn't need anyone. But the truth was, I was a mess. My online activism felt hollow. My confident pronouncements on gender dynamics felt fraudulent. I was a hypocrite. I spent my days railing against men who exploited women for emotional labor, and all the while, I had been the biggest exploiter of all. That was the thought that kept me up at night, the one I couldn't escape. I had become the very thing I despised. The weeks that followed were a new kind of hell, a quiet, mundane one. My life, which had once felt so full of purpose and righteous struggle, now felt like a long, empty hallway. I tried to fill the void. I threw myself into my work, my activism, my social life, but everything was tainted. I would be in a meeting, and my boss would say something mildly condescending, and my first instinct would be to mentally compose the text I'd send to Demir about it, the text that would get a reply in minutes, telling me I was right to be annoyed, that my boss was a prime example of mediocre male authority. But then the impulse would die, and I'd just be left with the feeling of being condescended to, with no outlet. I'd be out with my friends, and someone would tell a story about a frustrating experience on a dating app. I would offer my usual feminist analysis, talking about the commodification of women and the emotional immaturity of men. But my own words would sound hollow in my ears. I was just repeating slogans, talking points that felt disconnected from the raw, personal ache in my chest. My friends would nod along, but they couldn't provide the specific, tailored validation I had gotten from Demir. He knew my history, my triggers, my specific sensitivities. His validation wasn't generic, it was personal, and it was gone. The loneliness was the worst part. It was a physical presence, a weight on my shoulders that made it hard to get out of bed in the morning. I had always thought of myself as self-sufficient. I had lectured so many people on the importance of not deriving your self-worth from a man. Yet here I was, completely adrift, because a man had withdrawn his attention. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. I started to re-examine our entire friendship, playing back years of conversations in my head. I saw it all so clearly now. The countless times I had called him to complain about some guy who had wronged me, only to hang up as soon as I felt better, never asking how he was. The times I had bailed on plans with him at the last minute because a more exciting offer came along. The way I talked about my desire for a real man, a challenge, right in front of him, completely oblivious to how that must have made him feel. Each memory was a fresh stab of shame. I had treated him like a utility, an emotional service provider. He was my comfort, my confidant, my cheerleader, my handyman, my chauffeur. And what was I to him? A constant reminder of what he couldn't have. I had put him in a box labeled best friend, and in doing so, I had completely dehumanized him. He wasn't a person with his own needs and feelings. He was a character in my story, playing a supporting role. And when he tried to step out of that role to be a main character in his own life, I had shut him down with the most patronizing line in the book. "You're like a brother to me." It was a lie. I didn't treat him like a brother. I wouldn't have dared treat a family member with such casual disregard. I treated him like something I owned. This realization didn't come in a single flash of insight. It was a slow, agonizing process, like a wound being cleansed. It hurt, but for the first time, I felt like I was seeing things clearly. My entire framework for understanding the world was built on a lie. I wasn't fighting the patriarchy. I was just using its language to justify my own selfish behavior. I complained about toxic masculinity while embodying a form of toxic femininity that was just as destructive. This new self-awareness was crippling. I didn't know who I was anymore. If I wasn't the strong, righteous feminist I'd always believed myself to be, then what was I? Just another selfish person, using people and discarding them. The thought was unbearable. After about 2 months of this self-imposed exile and torment, I hit a breaking point. I was at home one night, trying to assemble a bookshelf I'd bought. The instructions were confusing. The little screws kept falling out of my hands. I was getting more and more frustrated until I was on the verge of tears. It was such a stupid, simple task, but I couldn't do it. And I knew with absolute certainty that if I called Demir, he'd be over in 20 minutes. He'd patiently decipher the instructions, assemble the whole thing without complaining, and probably make a joke to make me feel better. I sat there on the floor, surrounded by pieces of cheap particle board, and I just broke down. I wasn't crying over the bookshelf. I was crying for him, for the kindness I had squandered, for the friend I had lost. It was in that moment that I knew I couldn't live with the silence anymore. I had to talk to him. This wasn't about getting my emotional support system back. It wasn't about easing my own loneliness. It was about apologizing. I needed to face him as a person and tell him that I finally understood. I needed to acknowledge the pain I had caused him without making any excuses. I owed him that much. I didn't have his number anymore. He was gone from all my social media. But I knew where he worked. He had a steady, boring office job in the city center. The thought of just showing up there felt insane, like something a stalker would do. But what other choice did I have? I spent the next few days rehearsing what I would say. I wrote down speeches and then tore them up. They all sounded fake and self-serving. In the end, I decided to just speak from the heart. No manipulation, no crocodile tears, just the truth. I would tell him I was sorry. I would tell him he was right. And then I would walk away and leave him alone for good. That was the plan. I picked a day, a Thursday. I remember feeling sick to my stomach all morning. I took the train into the city, my hands clammy, my heart pounding. I got to his office building about 15 minutes before noon. I knew he usually took his lunch break right at 12. I stood across the street, trying to look casual, feeling like the most conspicuous person on the planet. Every minute felt like an hour. I almost lost my nerve a dozen times. What if he wasn't there? What if he saw me and just turned around? What if he yelled at me? But I stayed. I had to do this. Then, at a few minutes past 12, the glass doors of the building slid open, and a stream of office workers came out into the sunlight. And there he was. My breath caught in my throat. It was him, but it was also not him. He was wearing a simple button-down shirt and slacks. Nothing fancy, but he carried himself differently. His shoulders were back. His head was held high. He wasn't walking with that slight, apologetic stoop I was so used to. He looked solid, confident. He was laughing, talking to a coworker walking next to him. It was a real, genuine laugh, the kind I hadn't heard from him in years. He looked happy. He looked healthy. And a terrible, selfish thought shot through my mind. He's doing better without me. The thought was like a punch to the gut. For a second, I wanted to turn and run. But I had come this far. I took a deep breath, waited for a gap in the traffic, and crossed the street. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I walked up behind him as his coworker waved goodbye and went in a different direction. I said his name. Demir? He stopped. He turned around slowly. The smile on his face vanished the moment he saw me. It was replaced by a look of complete and utter neutrality. There was no anger, no surprise, not even any recognition, really. It was like he was looking at a stranger who had mistaken him for someone else. Sophia, he said. His voice was calm. I had 1,000 things I wanted to say, but my mind went completely blank. I just stood there, speechless. I felt all my rehearsed apologies, my carefully constructed explanations, crumble into dust. He just looked at me, waiting. The silence was excruciating. I finally managed to stammer something out, the worst possible thing I could have started with. You just disappeared, I said, and my voice sounded weak and accusatory. I was worried. It was a lie. I wasn't worried. I was inconvenienced, and he knew it. A flicker of something crossed his face. Not anger. It looked more like boredom. I didn't disappear, Sophia, he said, his voice level. I just started living my life. You should try it sometime. The words were like a slap. I tried to recover, to get back to my plan of apologizing. Look, I know I messed up, I began. I came here to say I'm sorry, for everything, for how I treated you. He just nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. He didn't say thank you or I accept your apology. He said nothing. He was giving me nothing to work with. I started to babble, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. I took you for granted. I used you. I was a terrible friend. I see that now. I miss you. I miss my best friend. The last part was a mistake. I knew it as soon as I said it. It was a slip back into the old dynamic, making it about my needs, my feelings. He didn't react, but I saw the subtle shift in his posture. He was done with this conversation. He was about to say something, probably something final, something that would cut me off for good. But he never got the chance. because, at that moment, a woman walked out of his office building. She was average height, with brown hair tied back in a simple ponytail. She was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. She wasn't a model. She wasn't stunningly beautiful. She was just normal. She saw Demir, and her entire face lit up with a smile. It was a genuine, unforced smile of pure happiness. She walked right up to him, completely ignoring me. "Hey, you," she said, her voice warm and light. "Ready for lunch?" Demir turned to her, and the transformation was instantaneous. The cold, neutral mask he had been wearing for me just melted away. His face softened, and he smiled back at her. It was the same genuine, happy smile I had seen a few minutes earlier. "Yeah, 1 second," he said to her, his voice gentle. He didn't introduce us. He didn't explain who I was. To him, in that moment, I was just a random obstacle on the sidewalk. The woman glanced at me, a quick, polite, and completely disinterested look. Then she looked back at Demir and lightly touched his arm. It was a small, simple gesture, an act of casual intimacy. But for me, it was like a lightning strike. In that single touch, I saw everything. I saw their easy comfort with each other, the shared jokes, the mutual respect, the effortless connection. This wasn't something new. They had a history. While I had been wallowing in my self-pity, he had been building a new life, a life that didn't just exclude me, but had no room for someone like me at all. He had moved on. He hadn't just gotten over me. He had upgraded. He had found someone who didn't see him as a utility, but as a partner. Someone who touched his arm with affection, not as a tool of manipulation. I stood there, frozen, as a wave of cold, hard reality washed over me. My grand apology, my desperate attempt at closure, it was all meaningless. It was too little, too late. My presence here was not a dramatic turning point in his life. It was an annoying interruption to his lunch plans. The humiliation was absolute. It was a physical sensation, a hot flush that spread from my chest to my face. I had been so arrogant. I had assumed he was just sitting around, miserable without me, waiting for me to come back and fix everything. I had thought my apology would be a gift, a magnanimous act of forgiveness that he would gratefully accept. But he didn't need my forgiveness. He had already found something better. Happiness. Demir gave me one last, final look. There was no hatred in it, no anger. There was nothing. It was the look you give to a piece of furniture you're leaving behind in an old apartment. It was part of a past you no longer think about. "I have to go," he said, and the words were not an excuse. They were a statement of fact. He turned his back on me. He put his hand on the small of the woman's back, a gesture that was both protective and familiar. They started walking down the street, away from me. I heard her laugh at something he said, a clear, happy sound that echoed in the space between the buildings. I just stood there on the sidewalk, unable to move. I watched them until they turned the corner, their shoulders brushing against each other, perfectly in sync. And then they were gone. I was alone. More alone than I had ever been in my entire life. The grand narrative of my life, the one where I was the righteous hero and he was the devoted sidekick, had been a complete fiction. The truth was much simpler. He was the hero of his own story, and I wasn't even the villain. I was just the obstacle he had to overcome in Chapter 1 to get to his happy ending. The Friendzone wasn't a tool I could use to keep a man in my orbit. It was a cage I had built for him, and he had just found the key and walked out, leaving me locked inside. I stood on that street corner for a long time as people bustled past me, living their lives. For the first time I understood. The systems of power, the toxic dynamics, they were all real. I had just been looking at them from the wrong side of the equation.